everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be going over all of my 2021 reading stats. This is my first year doing a video like this, so I don't really know what I'm doing here. I'm just gonna throw together some stats. Some are going to be the ones that come from Goodreads, what they do with their little wrap-up thing where they tell you about your year in books. Some of them are gonna come from my reading tracker. I have a pretty extensive spreadsheet where I track all of my reading and the authors and the genres and the ratings and whatnot, so I'll throw together some stats from that. But if there's anything else by the end of this video that you're curious about, definitely let me know so that when it comes this time next year, I can incorporate that into it as well. Maybe I'll even add that into my spreadsheet so I can track it throughout the year. But these are just going to be the highlights of what I think is pretty interesting about my reading. I wanted to take a look at where I had the most success with my reading to help kind of inform what I'm reading next year. So hopefully we can get some findings out of that as well. But let's go ahead and just jump on in to the stats and we'll see what happens. I'm going to get started with some of the Goodreads stats that they put together. So first off the bat, how many books did I read this year? I read 106 books. That's not quite as much as I read in 2020, but I'm totally fine with that. I wasn't trying to read an insane amount this year. I actually set my reading goal at like 50 books just to aim for about a book a week. I knew I would definitely read more than that, but I didn't want to try to beat the 120 something that I read in 2020. I really just wanted to be reading more good books and focus less on trying to fly through a ton of books. I'm so impressed that I ended up hitting over 100 books this year. That still sounds great to me. I also, according to Goodreads, read 33,000 pages. That is probably a little bit understated because this isn't going to count books that I DNF'd, where I read like half the book and then didn't read anymore. I DNF'd 17 books this year and I don't mark those as read in Goodreads, so it's not factoring that. So probably a little more than 33,000 pages, but that number would equate to about 90 pages a day of reading, which sounds about right for what I do. I definitely don't read 90 pages every day. I have days where I read way more than that. I have days where I read way fewer than that or not reading at all. So that average number sounds about right to me. The shortest book that I read this year, according to Goodreads count, is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman at 64 pages. The copy that I own of this book is like 15 pages or something. I don't even know where that book is, but it is just a short story. So definitely read way shorter than that, but this is what Goodreads thinks is my shortest book. And then my longest book is The Prairie of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon at 848 pages, which definitely felt like the longest book that I read this year. I wasn't really enjoying it, but I just wanted to accomplish that book, and I definitely feel like I accomplished that book. My average book length, according to Goodreads, is 311 pages, which sounds about right for what I read. I really like to stick in that like 300 to 350 page limit. If it's any more than that, I get intimidated by the book because I don't want to spend a lot of time with books most of the time. I like to read them faster and just kind of consume the story as fast as possible for the most enjoyment. That's how I enjoy books. I read long books every now and then, but I stray away from them. And I also really love short books. So 311 pages on average sounds about right. The most popular book that I read this year was Dracula by Bram Stoker, which 1.8 million other people have shelved on Goodreads. And the least popular book that I read this year was The Visitor by Sergio Gomez, which only 2,500 people have also shelved. That's a little bit surprising to me because I see that book going around quite a bit. So I didn't think that would be the least popular, but I guess it was. My average rating for 2021, so I look at the Goodreads number for this, but I also look in my spreadsheet tracker because I do half-star ratings in my spreadsheet tracker, but you can't do that on Goodreads. So sometimes I worry there will be some discrepancy, but it's exactly the same across both my spreadsheet tracker and Goodreads this year. And that is a 3.5. That's pretty good. It's not amazing, but it's better. It could be, I guess. So on average, I like books quite a bit because a 3.5 is a pretty good rating, a pretty general rating, kind of just like middle of the line. So that sounds fine to me. The highest rated book that I read this year, that is the highest rated on Goodreads, is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, which has a 4.58 star average. And I gave that book 5 stars, so that aligns. And then Goodreads also tells you your first review of the year, and that was Wires and Nerves, Volume 1 by Marissa Meyer, which was a 5-star read for me, and I really enjoyed that. My last review of the year, however, was one that I did not enjoy so much, and that was His and Hers by Alice Feeney, which I gave 3 stars on Goodreads, but is probably a little bit more of just a 2-star for me. It's more of like a 2.5, so I rounded up on Goodreads, but in my brain, I round down to more of a 2-star. So that is all Goodreads really has for me. It also shows you all the books that you read this year, so I guess I can screenshot those and kind of throw those up on the screen so you can quickly look through all of the books that I read. Next up, we can take a look at some of the stats that I track in my reading tracker. The first one is how many books that I read each month. So here is a bar graph of how many books I read each month. On average, I read about 10 books each month, and some of my bigger months were January being the top month for reading with 16 books, and then July and October following up, both with 14 books that month. That falls exactly in line with how I expect my reading to trend. I tend to start the year off strong in January, reading a lot of books. I'm really in the mood for reading coming off the holidays. There is the Winterween Readathon where I read a lot of spooky books right at the beginning of the year, so that does not surprise me that that is my highest month. July also tends to be a high month because so many good thrillers come out in July. I don't know what it is about July or why they do that, if thrillers are like seasonally a summer type read in the market, but it seems like there are always so many good thrillers coming out in July, so I really get in the mood to read a bunch of those in July. And then in October, I typically am reading a lot of horror books and I fly through those, so that also tends to be a pretty big reading month for me. Next up, we can talk about which genres I read the most of. So here is a pie chart for my genre breakout. The biggest category, to no one's surprise, is thrillers with 37 books. Next up is horror with 27 books, fantasy with 16, and romance with 12. I'm a little bit surprised I read that many fantasy books this year. I didn't think that it would top out romance, but I'm not surprised that thriller and horror are at the top. Those are obviously the types of books that I enjoy the most, that I love to gravitate towards, that I get the most excited for. So if you're new to my channel and you're wondering what kind of books I read, this is a pretty good representation of what I tend to read the most of. Next up, we can take a look at breakouts by audience age. So most of the books that I read were adult titles this year, with 109 books for adults. Next up was YA, which I read 13 of, and then I only read 1 middle grade this year. I think it was a DNF. I think that is the only middle grade that I read. So that's not really shocking to me. I don't get as interested in YA titles as much, although from reflecting on my reading this year, I do tend to enjoy YA horror books quite a bit, so that might be a little bit more where I focus my reading in the future, but for the most part, I do tend to enjoy adult titles. Next, we can take a look at my star ratings breakout for the year. So here's a pie chart of my star rating mix. It is pretty evenly divided between 3-star, 4-star, and 5-star reads, which is very surprising to me. And then I also have quite a sizable chunk of books that are marked as NR for no rating. Those are books that I either DNF'd or they were nonfiction books that I don't want to rate because maybe it was a memoir and someone's personal story and it feels weird to put a rating on that. Or there are some books where I just finish them and then I don't know what to rate them. Sometimes it's because I didn't fully understand them and so I don't want to rate it low just because I didn't get it because it went over my head or I didn't spend enough time with it or whatever. So there's quite a decent chunk that I also leave not rated, but it's nice to see that I had 22 5-star reads this year. I had 22 4-star reads and I had 26 3-star. Only 3 1-star reads and 12 2-star reads. So not a terrible split, kind of evenly goes across the board, and then a couple of half-star ratings in there as well. Next up, how did I consume these books? So I also track whether I read a book physically or if I listened to it on audiobook. If I did a mix of both, I will just mark it as whichever one I used primarily to get through the book. And so here is a pie chart for my reading breakout. I read 26 books via audiobook this year and 97 books I did not. So only about 21% of my reading was through audiobook, which I think is less than it was in 2020. I have not enjoyed audiobooks as much this past year. I just haven't wanted to like sit still and listen to a book or like do things and listen to a book. I've been more in the mood to sit and read with my eyes. I don't know if that's going to change next year. It just kind of ebbs and flows. Sometimes I'm in the mood for audiobook listening and sometimes I just want to read books physically more often. It just kind of depends on the mood that I'm in. And then another thing that I thought was interesting would be to take a look at which books I read for videos and which I didn't, and I just picked up because I wanted to or just didn't involve them in a reading vlog. And we ended up with almost a perfect 50-50 split of books that I read for a reading vlog and ones that I did not. I I also wanted to take a look at which authors I read the most from this year. I typically don't read more than one book from an author for most of my reading. There's only a couple that I read more than one book from this year, and the one that I read the most from was Sarah J. Maas. I was reading the A Court of Thorns and Roses series this year, so that's no surprise. Next up was Marissa Meyer, who I read 3 books from. One was a DNF, and then the other 2 were graphic novels. And then there are a couple authors that I read 2 books from, and those are Stephen Graham Jones, Shauna Maguire, Charlotte McConaughey, Alex E. Harrow, and Alice Feeney. Otherwise, everyone else I only read 1 book from, which I think is going to change a little bit in 2022. I want to be able to get more excited about an author and then go read their backlist when I'm enjoying their stuff. I tend to just focus on the new stuff coming out. If I find an author I really like, I just think, okay, their books will be on my radar now. And if there's a backlist, I typically don't go read that, but I want to do that more this year. I'm already actively doing that with someone, which is a surprise because I'm probably gonna do a reading vlog for it. But yeah, I want to do that more this year so that I have more authors that I really can enjoy a lot of their books. And then something that I wanted to take a look at, which I literally just calculated because I just had the idea of this and I thought it would be interesting, is to look at my average star rating by genre to see which genres have been the most successful for me. So here is a table showing my highest rated star average rating for each genre. And at the top comes graphic novels, which is not, I mean, it's kind of surprising to me because I don't read many graphic novels. I didn't read a ton this year. Maybe I should add a column to show the count of how many titles I read so we can keep that in mind. So I read 4 graphic novels this year. 2 of those were Marissa Meyer. One of them was The Girl from the Sea. And then the other one, I can't remember what it was. Let me check. Oh, it was Delicates, which is the follow-up to Sheets. So keeping that in mind, I'm not surprised that it's so high because I do love all those graphic novels. Speculative being at the top is surprising for me, but there's only 1 title in this, and that was You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno. Sometimes I just don't know what to categorize a book, and so if it's just weird, I just call it a speculative book. But that one I guess you could also kind of call contemporary or fiction. I don't know. It's just speculative because there's some weirdness in it. Next up was satire, where there was also just 1 book that I read that was satire, and I think that one was Black Buck, which I read in January. 1 nonfiction, that one was The Anthropocene Reviewed, which is John Green's new book. And then what gets more interesting is these ones where I've read more than 1 book in the genre. So mystery comes up pretty high at 3.83, horror at 3.69 for 24 titles. That is actually really surprising to me because I feel like I don't find a lot of horror books that I really like. I feel like I read a lot of duds in the horror genre, but it actually outperforms thrillers, which on average only have a 3.38 star rating. I'm also surprised just to see literary fiction and fantasy ranking above thrillers. That's super surprising to me. Seeing sci-fi above romance is surprising to me. This is all just very, very interesting and something I might want to try to monitor a little more frequently because this is not how I would think I would stack rank genres for my enjoyment level of them. So it's interesting to see how the average star ratings kind of play out here. Okay, I think that's it. That's all I really have pulled together for stats. Like I said, this is my first time doing this video, so if there's anything else you think would be interesting to include in the next edition of this, definitely let me know down in the comments below so I can track that throughout the year and be able to report back to you next year. Some surprises in here, some things not super surprising, but tracking my reading is definitely something I like to do just because I do read so much. I like to keep a pulse on what I'm enjoying and what I'm not. One of the things that I feel like I took away from this year was I spent more time exploring the fantasy genre. I read more books than I expected to in the fantasy genre, and on average, the average rating for fantasy is about a 3.5 for the books that I read, which isn't bad, but I just don't feel like I'm really in the mood for it this year. I just gave it a try in 2021. I still have so many books on my TBR that are fantasy, but I don't know. It's just not really clicking with me right now. It's not really what I'm in the mood for. That could definitely change throughout the year. A year is a very long time, and my reading tastes do kind of ebb and flow, so maybe I'll get another fantasy kick later in the year, but for now, I definitely just want to spend a lot of time with thrillers and horrors and mysteries because those are just my roots. That's what I really love. Let me know if any of these stats surprised you. Let me know what you'd want to see in the future. We can chat about that all down in the comments below, but that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye.